You don't belong here. The voice snapped across the showroom, cutting through the subtle hum of air conditioning and the polished shine of freshly waxed cars. David Marshall paused at the entrance, taking in the scene with quiet precision, his dark jeans and simple gray shirt intentionally understated. No flashy watch, no designer shoes, just a man whose presence carried an unspoken gravity. The clerk, a mid-30s man with a sharp tie and sharper attitude, leaned against the desk with a smirk, clearly enjoying the moment. Customers nearby glanced over, some raising eyebrows, others lifting phones discreetly to record. A woman in a cream blazer whispered to her companion, "Is he serious?" But no one dared approach. David walked forward with a measured step, each one resonating in the high ceiling of the showroom like a drumbeat. His hand brushed the edge of the door frame as he moved toward the nearest car, a sleek black sports coupe, the sunlight glinting off its hood and reflecting the tension in the room. Linda Cooper, the showroom manager, appeared beside the desk, arms crossed, a posture crafted to assert authority. "Sir, this area is for qualified buyers," she said, voice firm but edged with condescension, her gaze flicking from David's plain attire to the polished floor behind him as if measuring his worth. David's eyes met hers, calm, steady, almost daring, and the silence that followed was thicker than any spoken word. A few of the employees glanced sideways, murmurs passing between them, curiosity tinged with uncertainty. One young salesperson, phone in hand, leaned slightly forward as if hoping to catch something remarkable on video, the red light blinking quietly, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. David stopped at the center of the showroom, taking a slow, deliberate breath, his mind replaying the countless moments over the years when appearances and assumptions had nearly blocked doors that should have been open. His gaze swept across the line of cars, each one a testament to power, success, and craftsmanship, yet the focus of all that beauty was not lost on him. It was a stage, a canvas for the lesson he was about to teach. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and checked his watch, the sleek design almost invisible against his skin, a subtle reminder that time, like power, was his to command. Customers shifted in their seats, some leaning in, others whispering urgently to companions, sensing the tension climbing higher. A clerk moved slightly, adjusting a brochure with a nervous glance toward the manager. David's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, not of arrogance, but of someone who had already seen the outcome before the first act even began. Every detail, from the placement of the keys on the counter to the glint of sunlight bouncing off chrome, seemed to align in anticipation. The murmurs grew louder, the energy in the room charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. David's assistant, standing quietly by the door, gave a subtle nod, activating the chain of events that would turn this confrontation on its head. In that instant, David Marshall became more than a man in plain clothes. He was a force, patient and unassuming, waiting for the exact moment to reveal that the laughter, the sneers, the assumptions of others were about to meet the undeniable truth of real power, and the showroom, once a theater of mockery, would become the stage for a revelation no one would forget. David Marshall took another step forward, his calm presence commanding the space without a word. Linda Cooper straightened her posture, a forced smile on her face, but the confidence in her tone wavered as she said, "Sir, you will need to provide proof of your purchasing power before we can proceed." David tilted his head slightly, the faintest curve of a smile playing at the corners of his lips, and reached into his jacket pocket. He retrieved a sleek tablet, sliding it across the polished desk, the screen lighting up with transaction confirmations, ownership documents, and pre-approval letters from his financial institution. The clerk recoiled slightly, eyes widening as he realized that every assumption he had made about the man before him was about to be proven wrong. Customers around the showroom leaned closer, murmuring quietly to each other, their phones held steadily as they captured every moment. One young man, dressed casually in a polo shirt and jeans, whispered to his companion, "Is he actually doing what I think he is?" David's assistant remained just a step behind, a silent anchor, watching the unfolding reactions with meticulous attention. The room's energy shifted palpably as Linda Cooper leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Even if you have the funds, this is highly irregular. Our protocol does. not allow purchases of this scale without prior appointment. David did not answer immediately. He took a slow breath, letting the words sink in, the weight of the moment pressing down on the room as all eyes focused entirely on him. The silence was a vacuum, each heartbeat amplified, the hum of the air conditioning a subtle undercurrent to the rising tension. Then, with measured precision, David tapped the tablet screen, sending approval across multiple accounts, confirming orders for every car in the showroom. The display changed, numbers rolling upward, inventory statuses updating in real time, and the air seemed to crackle with disbelief. Employees glanced at each other, unsure whether to react or remain frozen in place, while a few braver customers began nodding, a mixture of astonishment and quiet approval spreading through the crowd. Linda took a step back, her earlier smugness fading as the reality of the situation settled over her like a cold shadow. David's eyes met hers briefly, unflinching, and in that moment, the balance of authority had shifted completely. The murmurs grew louder, whispers now punctuated with admiration as the scale of his quiet, methodical assertion became undeniable. Every car in the showroom was now spoken for, each one a testament not to bravado but to the meticulous power of preparation, patience, and silent command. A few customers recorded the unfolding events, the realization dawning that the man standing before them was far more than his understated attire suggested. The tableau held, tension lingering in the air, the story of assumptions, underestimation, and the reveal of true influence crystallizing in every gaze. David remained poised, a figure of controlled authority, letting the gravity of the action speak louder than any words, leaving the showroom suspended in the astonishing revelation of what one calm, confident individual could accomplish when underestimated. Linda Cooper's composure wavered as the realization sank in, her hands gripping the edge of the desk for support while employees exchanged uncertain glances. David Marshall remained motionless for a moment, letting the room absorb the full weight of the transactions displayed on the tablet, every order meticulously confirmed, and each vehicle now officially allocated under his ownership. The customers shifted in their positions, some standing, others leaning over the sleek hoods to get a closer look, murmuring quietly to one another about the sheer scale of the purchase. A young woman holding her phone stepped forward, whispering, "I cannot believe this is happening right now," her eyes wide with awe as she recorded the unfolding scene. David's assistant moved subtly to adjust the sequence of confirmation emails, ensuring that the digital records aligned seamlessly with the physical reality, a silent orchestration behind the calm exterior. Linda cleared her throat, attempting to reassert some measure of authority. "Sir, this is unprecedented. We were not prepared for this volume." Yet her voice carried less conviction than before, and she faltered mid-sentence, the room now entirely captivated by the calm certainty in David's demeanor. He took a slow breath, tilting his head slightly, surveying the showroom with measured awareness, the polished concrete reflecting the sunlight streaming through the large windows, and the row of high-end cars gleaming like prizes awaiting their rightful recognition. Employees shifted uneasily, some lowering their gazes, others attempting to reconcile the sudden reversal of control that had taken over what had only moments before seemed like a predictable, orderly environment. The murmurs swelled, a mixture of astonishment, respect, and disbelief, carrying across the showroom like a rising tide, and David's presence seemed to anchor every gaze, holding attention with an invisible gravity that no words could enhance. Customers began whispering to each other, pointing discreetly, some nodding in understanding, others shaking their heads in incredulity. The dynamic of the space transformed from a place of casual browsing to a stage where a lesson in patience, perception, and silent authority was being delivered. A few employees tentatively approached, phones in hand, capturing the interaction with the growing realization that they were witnessing a demonstration of control executed with impeccable timing and strategic precision. David's gaze settled briefly on Linda Cooper, unflinching, steady, and entirely composed, conveying without speech the undeniable truth of his position and the consequences of prior assumptions. Every detail of the showroom, from the chrome accents of the vehicles to the subtle arrangement of brochures, seemed to hum with heightened awareness as the power balance shifted irrevocably. Customers leaned closer, voices dropping to whispers as they discussed the implications of what they had seen. The sense of a collective acknowledgment building that the quiet, deliberate actions of one individual had completely altered the environment and expectations. The tension gradually gave way to an undercurrent of respect and anticipation, a recognition that the situation was no longer about the initial confrontation but about the manifestation of authority, intelligence, and composure that could not be disputed. And as David Marshall allowed a faint, composed smile to emerge, the room held its collective breath, poised on the edge of understanding that the next moments would define the full scope of influence he had just asserted. The showroom had shifted into a different rhythm, the polished floors reflecting not just the cars but the palpable tension and awe that filled the space. David Marshall moved with deliberate calm, every gesture measured, each footstep resonating subtly as he approached the line of vehicles that now carried his name in the digital records. Linda Cooper remained by the desk, her expression tightening as she observed the transformation of authority in real time, the earlier smirk replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Employees hovered at a cautious distance, eyes darting between their screens and the man who had completely rewritten the expectations of the room. A cluster of customers had gathered near the front, whispering in hushed tones, some pointing their phones discreetly, recording what they sensed would be a story worth sharing. David paused in front of a dark blue luxury sedan, resting a hand lightly on the roof, as if acknowledging the power and craftsmanship contained within, his eyes sweeping across the showroom to meet those of anyone who had doubted him moments before. His assistant stepped quietly to his side, adjusting the sequence of confirmations, ensuring every transaction reflected the totality of the purchase, while the murmurs of the crowd grew into a steady hum of astonishment and respect. Linda took a careful step forward, voice even but tinged with disbelief. "Sir, this is unprecedented. Our systems were not designed for transactions of this scale in such a short time." David tilted his head, a subtle nod of acknowledgment, and said nothing, letting the weight of the action itself communicate the full story. Customers leaned in closer, craning their necks to see the screens and witness the updates in real time, the number of cars sold scrolling upward in a mesmerizing rhythm. A young man at the edge of the showroom whispered to a friend, "I have never seen someone handle a situation like this without raising their voice." David's gaze lingered on Linda once more, steady and unyielding, the calm assurance of his presence filling the room and compelling every observer to reevaluate their assumptions. The energy of the showroom shifted further, the initial tension now replaced by a mixture of admiration and awe, a collective recognition that this was not merely a purchase but a demonstration of composure, preparation, and influence. Employees began to move with more certainty, following the lead of the assistant in confirming the orders, while customers continued to watch, their faces reflecting disbelief and fascination. David stepped back slightly, surveying the room as a whole, allowing the silence to emphasize the full impact of the moment, each individual in the showroom internalizing the unexpected reversal of perception and the quiet, undeniable authority that had just been exercised. The hum of digital confirmations and the subtle rustle of paper blended with the low murmur of the audience, creating a tapestry of controlled chaos that contrasted with David's composed demeanor. Every detail, from the gleaming surfaces of the vehicles to the polished counters and reflective glass, seemed to mirror the precision and confidence that defined the man now at the center of it all. As the room absorbed the scope of the purchase and the clarity of David's silent assertion of power, a collective understanding began to form that appearances could deceive, assumptions could mislead, and that true authority often revealed itself in patience, precision, and an unwavering presence that required no words to command full attention. The murmurs in the showroom grew louder, curiosity transforming into an almost tangible energy as customers leaned in, watching each subtle move David Marshall made. His assistant, still discreetly at his side, executed the final confirmations, and the inventory screens blinked in real time, reflecting every car that had just shifted into new ownership. Linda Cooper's expression was a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgment, her earlier confidence eroded by the undeniable reality of what had just happened. Employees exchanged furtive glances, some shaking their heads, others nodding slowly as they realized that the assumptions they had relied on moments before were now completely overturned. A group of customers clustered near the edge of the showroom, whispering to each other, the low hum of voices blending with the ambient reflections from the polished floors and sunlight glinting off chrome and glass. David took a deliberate step toward a line of sports cars, resting his hand lightly on the hood of a deep red model, the reflection of his calm, unwavering gaze mirrored in its glossy surface. Each movement was deliberate, precise, communicating control and intention without a single word spoken. The room seemed to contract around him, every observer acutely aware that the man in front of them had just transformed the space, asserting a quiet authority that commanded attention. Linda attempted to regain control of the narrative, adjusting papers and shifting in place, but her words faltered under the weight of the unfolding truth. David's eyes met hers briefly, steady and composed, conveying the message without articulation. Every decision he had made was measured, deliberate, and irreversible. Customers began to murmur appreciatively, some raising phones to capture the proof of what they had witnessed, a story of patience, preparation, and the unspoken power of presence. Employees slowly began to follow the lead of David's assistant, aligning records, ensuring consistency between digital confirmations and the showroom's tangible reality, each action reinforcing the sense that the environment had shifted completely. The tension that had initially filled the room was now a mixture of awe and admiration, the understanding that what they had assumed about power, influence, and perception had been challenged in the most spectacularly silent way possible. David stepped back slightly, surveying the entire showroom, letting the weight of the actions he had initiated settle over the room. A calm smile briefly touching his lips as the realization dawned on everyone present. The quiet, unassuming man they had initially underestimated had orchestrated an outcome that left no doubt about his capabilities. The air seemed to vibrate subtly with collective acknowledgment. Every detail of the showroom, the polished floors, the gleaming surfaces of the vehicles, the placement of brochures and signage, reflecting the sudden shift in authority. Conversations among customers grew more animated, questions exchanged in whispers about what had just occurred, while David remained still, composed, a silent demonstration of control, patience, and the power of measured action. The scene held in perfect balance, tension and resolution intertwined, as the observers processed the revelation of his authority, the magnitude of his presence, and the skill with which he had transformed a moment of doubt and condescension into a demonstration of unassailable competence and respect. The atmosphere in the showroom had transformed completely, shifting from subtle tension to a quiet awe that wrapped around every observer like an invisible current. David Marshall remained at the center, his posture relaxed yet commanding, eyes scanning each corner of the room, taking in the astonished expressions of customers and employees alike. Linda Cooper took a hesitant step toward him, her earlier confidence diminished, her voice now carefully measured. "Sir, we will need to coordinate delivery schedules and complete additional paperwork." David simply nodded once, a small gesture that carried immense authority, and gestured toward his assistant, who immediately began organizing the documentation, ensuring everything aligned with the confirmed purchases. The customers leaned in closer, some craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the tablet screens, their whispers now filled with admiration rather than skepticism, murmuring about the sheer scale and precision of the operation. One young man near the entrance, phone raised slightly, whispered, "I have never seen someone handle a situation so quietly but decisively," while another woman adjusted her glasses, nodding slowly as she processed the entire sequence of events. David moved calmly to a line of luxury SUVs, resting a hand lightly on one of the hoods, the polished surface reflecting the ambient light, each vehicle standing as a testament to meticulous planning and strategic patience. Employees followed his lead, aligning the digital records with the physical inventory, their earlier uncertainty giving way to cautious acknowledgment of the orchestration unfolding before them. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a steady hum of curiosity and appreciation, the realization spreading that they were witnessing a controlled demonstration of influence and composure. David's gaze briefly met Linda's again, unwavering, the silent communication between them carrying far more weight than any words could, signaling that the authority in the room had shifted irrevocably. Customers moved closer to each other, exchanging impressions, some gesturing subtly to show their agreement with the quiet but absolute power being exercised. The sleek lines of the vehicles, the polished floors, and the ambient reflections all combined to accentuate the controlled dominance of David's presence, each element reinforcing the sense that nothing had been left to chance. As the final confirmations processed across the system, the room held its breath, taking in the full impact of what had occurred. The employees and customers alike began to understand that the earlier assumptions, the doubts, and the dismissive attitudes had been completely overturned by patience, precision, and silent command. David stepped back slightly, allowing the space to settle around him, the collective attention still anchored on his composed figure, a testament to the power of deliberate action and measured authority. The showroom, once a place of casual browsing, had become a stage for an extraordinary demonstration of control, perception, and the quiet force of someone underestimated yet supremely confident in their capacity to shape the environment. Every whispered observation, every glance exchanged among the crowd, and every subtle nod of acknowledgment reflected the growing awareness that what they had just witnessed was more than a transaction. It was a masterclass in presence, influence, and the art of commanding respect without raising one's voice. The subtle tension in the showroom began to shift as David Marshall's presence seemed to fill every corner, a calm certainty radiating from him that made the earlier skepticism and whispering fade into quiet attentiveness. Customers exchanged glances, their curiosity now tinged with admiration, as they watched him move methodically from one car to another, checking details with a precise, deliberate touch that conveyed both authority and care. Linda Cooper adjusted the stack of brochures at the desk, glancing at each screen as she tried to process the swift but meticulous execution of every purchase. Employees, previously uncertain, now followed the cues from David's assistant, organizing keys, updating logs, and ensuring that each detail reflected the finalized orders, their motions cautious but increasingly confident as they realized the scale of what had been accomplished. The murmurs among the crowd grew into a low hum of acknowledgment, with several customers leaning in to capture the screens and digital confirmations, each scroll upward of numbers and confirmations serving as undeniable proof of what had taken place. David paused briefly in front of a metallic silver sedan, resting a hand lightly on its roof and allowing his gaze to travel across the showroom, observing reactions with measured patience. The subtle gleam of sunlight off the cars accentuated the contrast between his composed demeanor and the astonishment of those around him. Linda took a small step back, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper to herself. This was not anticipated, this level of control. It is extraordinary. David's assistant handed him a small set of confirmations, which he reviewed with calm efficiency, each movement precise, deliberate, and quietly commanding the attention of everyone present. A cluster of customers moved closer to one another, whispering, pointing discreetly to their phones, and nodding subtly, acknowledging the skill, patience, and authority that David displayed without ever raising his voice. The polished floors and reflective surfaces of the cars and counters seemed to magnify the gravity of the moment, capturing the shift in energy that had completely transformed the showroom from a place of casual browsing into a stage of controlled influence and quiet power. Every detail, from the alignment of brochures to the reflective chrome, seemed to underscore the meticulousness of the process and the weight of deliberate decision-making. David stepped back slightly, allowing the observers a full view of the scene, his presence anchoring the room, a quiet but unmistakable signal that the situation had been resolved with precision, authority, and an almost theatrical subtlety. Customers whispered among themselves, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and respect, while employees followed through with final adjustments, all aware that they had just witnessed a demonstration of influence executed with calm assurance, turning what began as a moment of skepticism into a collective acknowledgment of the quiet but undeniable power of preparation, patience, and unspoken command. The showroom had fallen into a quiet rhythm, the low hum of conversations blending with the reflective gleam of chrome and glass as David Marshall moved deliberately among the vehicles, each step measured and purposeful. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of customers and employees alike, drawing their attention without a word, a silent command that required no amplification. Linda Cooper hovered near the desk, her earlier certainty replaced by a careful, almost hesitant vigilance, watching the man who had shifted the entire dynamic with nothing more than calm precision. David paused in front of a midnight blue sedan, running a hand lightly across the polished surface as if acknowledging the craftsmanship and the weight of the moment, his movements deliberate and composed. Customers leaned in subtly, their whispers a low murmur of awe and disbelief, several lifting phones discreetly to capture the unfolding demonstration of quiet authority. The assistant by his side moved with practiced efficiency, aligning digital confirmations with physical inventories, each gesture precise, reinforcing the sense that every detail had been anticipated and controlled. Employees, previously uncertain, began to follow these cues with measured confidence, organizing paperwork and keys in a sequence that matched the unfolding orders, the collective energy of the room now a mixture of respect, admiration, and disbelief. David's eyes briefly met Linda's, steady and unflinching, communicating the full weight of his presence and the irreversible nature of the actions he had initiated. A group of customers gathered near the front, whispering to each other, pointing subtly to screens, nodding as they recognized the deliberate orchestration and the quiet force behind every decision. The polished floors and reflective surfaces amplified the tension and clarity of the moment, the ambient light highlighting the meticulous control and the silent influence David exerted over the environment. Conversations shifted, turning from speculative murmurs to soft acknowledgment of the precision and composure being displayed, the room collectively recognizing the mastery of timing, patience, and calm authority in action. David took a slow breath, allowing the weight of his presence to settle fully over the space, each observer internalizing the lesson of measured power and strategic patience, and the showroom, once a casual place of browsing and routine, had become a stage upon which influence, discretion, and preparation were being demonstrated in their most compelling form. The subtle cadence of movement, the alignment of physical and digital reality, and the unspoken communication between David and his assistant created a tableau that held the attention of every individual, marking a moment of quiet transformation and respect that would linger in memory long after the showroom had emptied. As he stepped back slightly, surveying the entirety of the scene, the collective awareness of the room crystallized. Authority, true authority, could be exercised without force or raised voice, and its impact was as undeniable as it was elegantly demonstrated. The room was charged with a quiet electricity as David Marshall moved toward the center of the showroom, every footstep deliberate, each motion precise. Customers leaned in, some craning their necks to capture the unfolding scene on their phones, whispers spreading like a wave through the crowd as they tried to process the scale and intent of his actions. Linda Cooper remained near the desk, her posture rigid, eyes darting from screen to screen, the realization of what had just occurred settling over her with a heavy weight. Employees followed the assistant's guidance with careful attention, aligning digital confirmations to match the physical keys and paperwork on the counters, each movement reinforcing the authority that now dominated the space. David paused near a line of metallic gray sports cars, resting a hand lightly on one of the hoods, letting his presence fill the room with calm inevitability. The sunlight streaming through the large windows cast long reflections across the polished floors, highlighting the contrast between his composed demeanor and the astonishment evident in every onlooker. Customers whispered to each other, some nodding subtly, others exchanging quick glances that spoke volumes of admiration and disbelief, their eyes fixed on the seamless orchestration of control and precision unfolding before them. Linda adjusted a stack of brochures, her voice lowered almost imperceptibly. "This is beyond anything we anticipated," though even in her tone, there was an unspoken recognition of the quiet mastery being displayed. David's assistant moved efficiently, reviewing confirmations and ensuring every detail was accounted for, the subtle coordination demonstrating a level of preparation and anticipation that seemed effortless. The crowd began to lean subtly forward, each observer sensing that they were witnessing more than a transaction. They were watching a demonstration of strategic patience, calculated authority, and the understated power of composure. Employees glanced at one another, exchanging silent acknowledgments as they processed the rapid reversal of expectations, the earlier skepticism now replaced by cautious respect. David's gaze traveled across the showroom, pausing briefly on individual faces, unflinching, steady, conveying without words that every doubt and assumption had been considered and addressed in the most methodical manner possible. The polished vehicles reflected the light and the weight of the moment, creating a visual harmony that underscored the precision and clarity of the actions being taken. Conversations among customers softened into murmured reflections, a mixture of realization, admiration, and incredulity as they began to internalize the full magnitude of the influence and control being exercised. David stepped slightly back, allowing the room to absorb the full scale of what had just transpired, the energy shifting from tension to a charged recognition of capability and authority. Every whisper, glance, and subtle nod in the showroom contributed to a growing collective understanding that true power could manifest quietly, deliberately, and with a precision that commanded respect without raising a single voice, and the observers remained captivated, aware that this display of measured control was both extraordinary and unforgettable. David Marshall remained the center of attention, his posture calm and deliberate as he walked slowly between the rows of vehicles, each movement measured and precise, drawing the eyes of every observer. The polished surfaces of the cars reflected sunlight that streamed through the large windows, highlighting the subtle authority in his motions and the quiet command that filled the space. Customers whispered among themselves, phones raised discreetly to record, their expressions a mix of astonishment, admiration, and disbelief as they realized the scope and intention of his actions. Linda Cooper lingered near the desk, her previous confidence replaced with careful observation, as she tried to reconcile the rapid shift in control that had overtaken the showroom. Employees moved with quiet efficiency, following the assistant's lead, ensuring that digital confirmations, keys, and paperwork were perfectly aligned, every detail reflecting the seamless orchestration of the transaction. David paused at a bright red sports car, running his fingers lightly along the hood, the gesture calm but full of weight, as if acknowledging the culmination of planning, patience, and calculated action. The assistant made subtle adjustments to the tablet, ensuring that each confirmation matched the physical keys and inventory, while customers leaned in closer, murmuring softly to one another about the precision and elegance of the execution. Linda finally spoke, her tone low, almost hesitant. "Sir, we were not prepared for this level of control," but the words barely carried over the quiet murmurs of the observers. David's gaze met hers briefly, unwavering and steady, conveying the reality of his influence without a word, and in that silent exchange, the authority in the room shifted completely. The murmurs grew louder as observers whispered about the methodical and composed demonstration unfolding before them, a collective acknowledgment forming that what they had witnessed was more than a simple transaction, but a display of calculated patience and unspoken command. The polished floors, gleaming vehicles, and reflective counters all seemed to capture and amplify the presence of David, reinforcing the gravity of the moment and the subtle dominance he held over the environment. Customers began nodding quietly to each other, a mix of approval and recognition spreading through the room, while employees completed the final alignments with careful attention, ensuring every detail reflected the meticulous execution. David took a slow breath, his eyes scanning the showroom, letting the weight of the completed orders settle over the room, the subtle hum of astonishment and respect rising with every observer. Every glance, every whispered comment, and every subtle nod contributed to the growing understanding that true authority could be exercised without raised voices, without force, relying solely on composure, foresight, and strategic patience. The energy in the showroom held a perfect balance of awe and acknowledgment, as customers and employees alike absorbed the quiet power of his presence and the careful orchestration that had turned skepticism and doubt into a profound recognition of competence and influence. David Marshall stepped back slightly, allowing the room to take in the full scene, the polished surfaces of the vehicles, the reflected light, and the controlled motions of the staff, creating a tableau of authority, patience, and preparation that would remain etched in memory long after the doors closed. David Marshall shifted slightly, his eyes sweeping across the showroom with a composed intensity that seemed to draw every gaze toward him. The polished floors reflected the sunlight, casting elongated patterns across the line of cars, each vehicle a silent testament to the quiet authority he now commanded. Customers murmured softly among themselves, a mixture of astonishment and newfound respect filling the space, their phones capturing every angle as if documenting an event that was impossible to replicate. Linda Cooper remained at the edge of the desk, her posture tight, a careful observation in place of the assertiveness she had projected earlier, as if measuring the magnitude of the moment and reconciling the shift in control that had overtaken the showroom. Employees moved with deliberate efficiency, following the assistant's subtle cues, aligning digital confirmations, keys, and documentation with precise attention to detail, the room humming with an undercurrent of admiration for the orchestrated sequence. David paused before a metallic silver SUV, lightly touching the hood, the reflection of his steady gaze mirrored across the polished surface, emphasizing the calm dominance of his presence. The murmurs of the crowd grew into a soft but consistent rhythm, the astonishment gradually transforming into acknowledgment, whispers filled with admiration for the methodical and composed handling of what had begun as a moment of doubt and underestimation. Customers leaned in subtly, nodding quietly, pointing to screens, capturing the seamless flow of confirmations and inventory updates that reinforced the controlled execution taking place. Linda adjusted a brochure stack, her voice low, almost tentative. We were not expecting such precise command, though the words carried the weight of acknowledgment rather than challenge. David's gaze moved briefly from vehicle to vehicle, then rested on the faces of the customers and employees, unflinching and deliberate, conveying without speech that every detail, every reaction, had been anticipated and addressed with meticulous care. The polished surfaces of the cars, the sunlight bouncing off chrome accents, and the orderly alignment of paperwork all reflected the precision of the actions being taken, accentuating the silent authority being exercised. Observers began to recognize that what they were witnessing was more than a transaction. It was a demonstration of strategy, composure, and unspoken power, a display of how calm, deliberate action could completely reshape the perception of influence within a space. Employees completed final alignments, keys and documents reflecting the methodical approach that had orchestrated the entire sequence, while customers continued to whisper and nod in subtle agreement. The energy in the showroom now a mixture of respect, realization, and anticipation. David took a slow breath, allowing the weight of the moment to settle fully over the room. The collective focus centered on his composed figure, and the understanding among all present that quiet authority, patience, and precision could command the attention, acknowledgment, and admiration of everyone without a single raised voice, transforming a space once filled with doubt and condescension into a stage for controlled influence and undeniable competence. David Marshall allowed a slow, deliberate pause as he surveyed the showroom one final time, the sunlight bouncing off the polished vehicles and casting a warm glow that illuminated every astonished face. Customers shifted in their positions, leaning closer together, phones discreetly recording, their whispers now filled with recognition and admiration as they fully absorbed the precision and authority that had just been exercised. Linda Cooper remained at the desk, her posture cautious, every movement measured as she tried to reconcile the total reversal of control and the realization that the assumptions she had relied on were no longer valid. Employees followed the assistant's guidance, making careful adjustments to keys, paperwork, and digital confirmations, each motion reinforcing the methodical sequence that had been executed without haste but with meticulous precision. David moved slowly along the line of vehicles, lightly touching the hoods and rooftops, acknowledging the craftsmanship and weight of the moment, his calm presence commanding attention without a single word. Customers leaned in subtly, exchanging quiet glances, pointing toward the screens, nodding as they recognized the deliberate orchestration and the quiet mastery being displayed. The polished floors reflected the ambient light and the careful alignment of the vehicles, creating a visual harmony that mirrored the composure and authority David carried throughout the space. Linda finally spoke in a low, measured tone. "We have never seen such calm control. It is impressive." The acknowledgment unspoken but understood by all in the room. David's gaze met hers briefly, steady and unwavering, signaling the quiet assertion of influence and the completeness of the executed plan. Observers, both customers and employees, shifted from disbelief to a mixture of respect and admiration, the murmurs of conversation softening as they processed the lesson in patience, strategy, and silent power that had just been displayed. Each confirmation processed across the system, each vehicle now accounted for, reinforced the scale and precision of the undertaking, leaving no question as to the methodical execution behind every decision. David stepped back slightly, letting the room absorb the full scope of his presence and the outcome of the carefully orchestrated actions. The energy of the showroom now transformed from skepticism and condescension into acknowledgment and quiet reverence. The sunlight glinted off chrome accents. The polished floors reflected the orchestrated order, and every subtle movement, from the assistant's adjustments to the employee's careful alignment of records, created a tableau of measured authority and control. Customers whispered among themselves, expressions ranging from awe to astonishment, while the staff completed final tasks with a newfound sense of understanding and respect. David remained composed, eyes sweeping the room, a figure of deliberate influence, his calm demeanor demonstrating that true authority required no dramatics, only patience, preparation, and a presence that commanded attention and admiration. The showroom had shifted entirely, transformed into a space where competence, composure, and strategy were visible in every reflection, every gesture, and every breath of the room, leaving everyone present with a lasting impression of the quiet but undeniable power of David Marshall. David Marshall finally allowed himself a small, composed smile as he stepped back to observe the full scope of the showroom. The polished floors reflected sunlight across every gleaming car, the alignment of vehicles, keys, and documentation perfect and deliberate, underscoring the precision of the execution. Customers whispered quietly, some nodding subtly to one another, their phones capturing the proof of what had just transpired, a silent acknowledgment of the authority and strategic mastery on display. Linda Cooper remained near the desk, her posture upright but tense, eyes following each movement with an unspoken understanding that the dynamic in the room had shifted irreversibly. Employees worked methodically, guided by the assistant, ensuring that every digital confirmation matched the physical arrangements, reinforcing the seamless orchestration that David had quietly commanded from the beginning. David paused at the edge of the showroom, taking a slow, measured breath, letting the significance of the moment settle over everyone present. Customers leaned in slightly, exchanging glances of recognition and quiet admiration, realizing that what they had witnessed was more than a transaction. It was a lesson in composure, preparation, and the subtle demonstration of power. The sunlight glinted off chrome and polished surfaces, the reflections capturing the calm intensity in David's eyes and the precise coordination of his assistant and staff. Linda adjusted a brochure, her voice low and careful. "This is impressive," the acknowledgment unspoken but clear in the room. David's gaze swept across the showroom, meeting the eyes of employees and customers, conveying without words that every action, every decision, had been calculated and executed with meticulous care. The energy in the showroom shifted fully from tension and skepticism to admiration and respect, whispers and nods quietly spreading as everyone absorbed the impact of what had just unfolded. Every movement, every glance, every subtle coordination contributed to the realization that authority could be exercised with patience, strategy, and an unwavering presence without a single raised voice. Customers began to step back slightly, yet their eyes remained fixed on David, observing the calm mastery that had transformed a moment of doubt into a clear, an undeniable display of competence and influence. Employees completed final tasks with careful attention, the alignment of paperwork and keys mirroring the precision and intention of the entire process. David allowed one final, measured look across the showroom, the polished floors, the gleaming vehicles, and the attentive observers all reinforcing the magnitude of the silent command he had executed. The room now held a quiet reverence, a shared understanding among customers and staff that what they had experienced was a demonstration of calm authority, strategic foresight, and the power of preparation, leaving a lasting impression that would remain vivid long after the showroom returned to its normal rhythm.